The rain hammered against the old pickup truck's windshield like bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments that blurred the world beyond recognition. Sarah Chen pressed her face closer to the glass, squinting through the darkness as lightning split the Montana sky. The fuel gauge had been sitting on empty for the last 20 miles, and now the engine was making that horrible grinding sound that meant she had maybe minutes before it died completely. Thunder rolled across the vast landscape, drowning out the whimpering of her 3-year-old daughter Emma in the back seat. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, not from the cold seeping through the broken heater, but from the crushing weight of desperation that had become her constant companion since David's funeral 6 months ago. "Mama, I'm scared," Emma whispered, clutching her threadbare stuffed rabbit. "It's okay, baby. We're going to be okay." The lie tasted bitter on Sarah's tongue. They had $37 to their names, nowhere to go, and a truck that was about to become their coffin if she didn't find shelter soon. Then she saw it, a warm glow cutting through the storm like a beacon. A ranch house sat maybe a quarter mile off the main road, its windows golden with light. Sarah had sworn she'd never beg, never become one of those people who showed up at strangers' doors asking for help. But as another bolt of lightning illuminated Emma's frightened face in the rearview mirror, pride became a luxury she couldn't afford. The truck shuddered to a stop just as she turned into the gravel driveway. Sarah grabbed Emma and their single suitcase, then ran through the pelting rain toward the wraparound porch. Her finger hesitated over the doorbell. What if they turned her away? What if the door opened before she could ring? A man stood silhouetted against the warm lights, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair. His weathered face showed surprise, then immediate concern as he took in the sight of a soaked woman holding a shivering child. "Please," Sarah said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "My truck died, and we need help." Jake Sullivan had lived alone on the Broken Arrow Ranch for 8 years, ever since his wife left him for a life that didn't involve mud, cattle, and the kind of isolation that could drive a person mad. He'd grown comfortable with solitude, had convinced himself it was better this way. But something about the desperation in this woman's dark eyes, the way she held her little girl like she was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world, cracked something open in his chest that he'd thought was sealed forever. "Get inside," he said, stepping back to let them pass. "You're both soaked through." Sarah stumbled into the warmth, overwhelmed by the smell of coffee and something wonderful simmering on the stove. The living room was masculine but clean, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully and worn leather furniture that looked like it had stories to tell. "I'm Jake," he said, already moving toward a whole closet. "Let me get you some towels." "Sarah," she managed, "this is Emma. I'm sorry to bother you, but no bother." Jake returned with thick towels and a questioning look. "You running from something?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Sarah's grip tightened on Emma, and Jake saw the way her eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes even as exhaustion weighed her down. "Just bad luck," she said. Finally, Jake nodded, recognizing the deflection. He'd used the same tone when people asked about his own scars. "Well," he said, "bad luck's got a way of changing direction. Sometimes you just need to give it time." Sarah woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of her daughter's laughter, a sound that had become so rare it made her chest ache. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The storm, the breakdown, the stranger who'd opened his door without question. She found Emma in the kitchen, perched on a stool beside the stove, watching Jake flip pancakes with the intense concentration of someone who'd been promised she could help with the next batch. Both of them looked up when Sarah appeared in the doorway, and she was struck by how natural they looked together, this gruff rancher and her chattering daughter. "Mama." "Jake's making pancakes, shaped like horses." Emma bounced on her stool. "Syrup. Already decorating her pajamas." "I can see that." Sarah accepted the cup of coffee Jake offered, inhaling the rich aroma. Real coffee, not the instant stuff she'd been buying at the dollar store. "Thank you. For everything. I'll call a tow truck for my truck and we'll get out of your hair." Jake slid a plate of pancakes across the counter to her. "Eat first, and there's no rush. Storm knocked out the phone lines anyway." Sarah took a bite, and despite everything, she almost moaned with pleasure. When was the last time she'd had a real breakfast? When was the last time someone had taken care of her, instead of the other way around? "I can pay you for the food," she said, reaching for her purse. "You can pay me by eating it," Jake replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Besides, Emma here's already earned her keep. She's been telling me all about her imaginary horse, Starlight. He's not imaginary, Emma protested. He's just invisible. There's a difference. Jake's mouth twitched. My apologies. You're invisible horse. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. Men usually didn't know what to do with Emma's endless chatter and wild imagination. David had loved their daughter, but he'd never quite figured out how to engage with her flights of fancy. Yet here was this stranger, treating Emma's stories with the same gravity he'd probably give to a business discussion. After breakfast, Jake showed them around the ranch. The Broken Arrow had been in his family for 3 generations, he explained, though his voice carried a note of sadness when he mentioned how much smaller it was now than in his grandfather's day. They walked through the barn, where Emma squealed with delight at the horses, and past the vegetable garden that Jake admitted he'd been neglecting. I'm better with animals than plants, he said, gesturing at the weeds overtaking what had once been neat rows of vegetables. I used to garden, Sarah said without thinking, before she stopped herself. Before bad luck found you. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. They were standing at the fence line, watching Emma chase butterflies in the pasture, when Jake said, I need to check on the herd today. Storm might have spooked them, and I've got a couple of pregnant mares I'm worried about. You're welcome to come along, if you want. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Truth is, I could use the help. And Emma might enjoy seeing more of the ranch. Sarah studied his profile, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy. When was the last time she'd felt safe enough to let someone else make decisions? Okay, she said. We'll help. The day passed in a blur of new experiences. Emma rode on Jake's shoulders as they walked the fence line, checking for storm damage. Sarah found herself falling into step beside them, listening to Jake explain the different breeds of cattle, the way the land rolled away toward the mountains in the distance. The challenges of running a ranch alone. Alone? Sarah asked. You've never been married. Jake was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 8 years ago, she decided ranch life wasn't for her. Can't say I blame her. It's hard country. But you stayed. This land's in my blood. My great-grandfather built that house with his own hands, cleared this pasture stone by stone. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. Sarah understood. She'd felt that way about the little apartment she and David had shared, the way she'd clung to it even after he was gone, even when she couldn't afford the rent. Some places become part of you, woven into your identity, until leaving feels like losing yourself. That evening, Jake called his neighbor with the working phone line, arranging for a tow truck to look at Sarah's pickup. The news wasn't good. That engine was shot, and the repair cost was more than the truck was worth. I'm sorry, Sarah said, after Jake relayed the mechanic's assessment. I know you want us gone. Who said I wanted you gone? The question stopped her cold. Jake was looking at her with those steady gray eyes, and she realized she'd been so focused on her own shame, her own desperate need to not be a burden, that she'd never considered he might actually want their company. I just assumed you assumed wrong. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Stay, at least until you figure out what comes next. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in Jake's kitchen at dawn, her hands covered in flour, as she kneaded dough for the bread that had become her morning ritual. The rhythm of it soothed her push, fold, turn, push again. It reminded her of the life she'd had before David's cancer diagnosis, when her biggest worry was whether to plant tomatoes or peppers in their tiny garden. Emma's voice drifted from the living room, where she was reading, to Jake's old border collie, Rex. The dog had appointed himself Emma's guardian, following her everywhere with the patient devotion of a grandfather watching his favorite grandchild. Sarah smiled, remembering Emma's initial fear of the large dog, and how Jake had gently coaxed her into petting Rex, showing her how to read the dog's body language. He's telling you he's friendly, Jake had said, crouching beside Emma as Rex wagged his tail. See how his whole body wiggles. That means he's happy to meet you. Now Emma and Rex were inseparable, and Sarah often found her daughter curled up against the dog's warm fur, both of them napping in patches of sunlight that streamed through the big windows. The back door opened, and Jake stepped in, bringing the scent of hay and morning air. He'd been up since 4, as he was every day, checking on the animals and fixing whatever had broken overnight. Sarah had learned that ranch life was an endless cycle of maintenance and vigilance, but Jake never complained. He simply did what needed doing, the same way he'd simply opened his door to them that first night. Smells good in here, he said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Bread'll be ready in an hour. Sarah dusted flour from her hands, Coffee's fresh. This had become their routine. Jake would come in for coffee before heading out to the far pastures, and Sarah would have breakfast waiting when he returned. It wasn't an arrangement they'd discussed. It had simply evolved naturally, like two rivers finding their way to the same sea. "Sarah," Jake said, settling into the chair that had become his at the kitchen table. "I need to ask you something." Her hands stilled on the dish towel. Here it comes, she thought. The polite but firm request for her to make other arrangements. She'd known this day would come, had been dreading it even as she'd grown more comfortable in the rhythm of ranch life. "Mrs. Henderson called last night," Jake continued. "She's the teacher at the elementary school in town. She heard about Emma's communities. Word travels fast, and she wanted to know if Emma would be starting school in the fall." Sarah's stomach clenched. School meant permanent addresses, enrollment forms, questions about Emma's father and why they were living with a man who wasn't family. It meant all the complications she'd been avoiding by staying in this bubble of temporary sanctuary. "I told her I'd talk to you," Jake said carefully. "But Sarah, that's still 3 months away. What are you planning to do?" The question she'd been avoiding hung between them like a live wire. Sarah had been existing day to day, grateful for the reprieve but not daring to think beyond the next sunrise. Now, faced with the need to make actual decisions about their future, she felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've been looking for work, but without a car, and with Emma to consider, ... I don't know." Jake leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What if you didn't have to leave?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if you stayed? Permanently? I know it's not what you planned," but he ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncertain. "This place is better with you both in it." "I'm better with you in it." Sarah stared at him, afraid to hope. "Jake, you don't owe us anything. This isn't about owing. This is about ... Look, I haven't been completely honest with you. When my wife left, she said I was impossible to live with. Said I was cold, distant, that I cared more about the ranch than about her. Maybe she was right. But with you and Emma here, I remember what it feels like to have a family. To have someone to come home to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd felt it tooth away. Jake's eyes sought hers across the dinner table. The way he'd started lingering over his morning coffee. The way his hand had brushed hers when he'd helped her down from the truck yesterday, and how neither of them had pulled away. "I'm not looking for charity," she said finally. "And I'm not offering it. I'm offering partnership. You've been managing the household accounts, organizing the supply orders, keeping track of the breeding schedules. You've turned that disaster of a garden into something that'll actually feed us this winter. And Emma... His voice softened. "Emma's brought joy back to this place. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten until she filled it with laughter." Sarah thought of Emma's face when Jake had lifted her onto his shoulders yesterday. How her daughter had thrown back her head and laughed with pure delight. She thought of the way Jake listened to Emma's stories with complete attention, never dismissing her imaginative tales or telling her to be quiet. She thought of the way he'd insisted on buying Emma new school clothes on their last trip to town, brushing away Sarah's protests with a gruff "every kid needs new things for school." "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Jake's cheeks reddened slightly. "I'm proposing that you stay as my partner in running this ranch, as Emma's swell, as the closest thing to a mother she's got, and maybe, eventually, as more than that." The last part was said so quietly, Sarah almost missed it. When the full meaning hit her, she felt her face flush with heat. "Jake... I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving David, and I respect that. I'm not asking you to make any promises about us, about what we might become. I'm just asking you to stay and let us see what happens." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. She thought of David, of the love they'd shared, and the life they'd planned. She thought of the future she'd imagined for herself and Emma's small apartment. Careful budgeting, the constant struggle to make ends meet. Then she thought of Emma's laughter echoing through these rooms, of Jake's patient strength, of the way this place had started to feel like home. "Emma would love it here," she said finally. "And you, what would you love?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. At the hope and vulnerability in his expression, at the way he'd opened his life to them without expecting anything in return, at the possibility of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "I think," she said slowly, "I would love to stay." The first real test came on a Tuesday morning in late August, when Jake didn't come in for his morning coffee. Sarah waited, keeping his breakfast warm. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, worry began to gnaw at her. Ranch life had taught her that Jake's routines were sacred. He was as reliable as sunrise, and his absence meant something was wrong. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, with his head in his hands. His left shoulder was pressed against his side at an awkward angle, and his face was pale with pain. "Jake," Sarah rushed to his side. "What happened?" "Damn fool horse spooked at a snake," he said through gritted teeth. "Threw me into the fence post. Think I dislocated my shoulder." Sarah's nursing instincts, dormant since David's illness, kicked in immediately. She'd spent enough time in hospitals to recognize the signs of serious injury. "We need to get you to the doctor." "Can't go. That buyer coming to look at the cattle this afternoon. Been trying to sell those 20 head all summer. The cattle can wait. You need medical attention." "Sarah, you don't understand. I can't afford to miss this sale. The banknote's due next month, and if I don't make this payment..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah heard the fear underneath his stubborn pride. She'd seen that look before, in David's eyes when the medical bills started piling up, when he'd realized that loving someone wasn't always enough to protect them from the harsh realities of life. "Then we'll make sure you don't miss it," she said firmly. "But first, we're fixing your shoulder." The drive to town was tense, with Jake alternating between giving her directions and trying to convince her to turn around. Emma sat in the back seat, unusually quiet as she sensed the adult anxiety filling the truck. At the clinic, Dr. Martinez confirmed what Sarah had suspected: dislocated shoulder, probably some torn ligaments. The relocation procedure was quick, but painful, and Jake emerged from the examination room with his arm in a sling and a prescription for pain medication. "No heavy lifting for at least 2 weeks," Dr. Martinez warned. "And I mean it. Jake, you tear those ligaments worse, and you'll be looking at surgery." In the truck afterward, Jake was silent, staring out the window at the passing landscape. Sarah could practically hear the calculations running through his head: how to manage the ranch with one arm, how to handle the cattle sale, how to keep everything from falling apart. "I can help," she said quietly. "Sarah, you don't know anything about cattle. Then teach me. You've got 4 hours until that buyer arrives. Show me what I need to know." Jake turned to look at her, and she saw surprise in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hope. "It's not that simple. These are range cattle, not pets. They're half wild, and they don't know you. But they know you, and they know your voice, your commands. I can be your arms for a few hours." What followed was the most intense crash course in ranching Sarah had ever experienced. Jake positioned himself on the fence, while she worked in the pen, his voice guiding her through the process of separating the cattle he wanted to sell from the rest of the herd. Rex proved invaluable, responding to Jake's whistles and helping to move the cattle where they needed to go. "Easy," Jake called, as a particularly large bull eyed Sarah with suspicion. "Don't stare him down. Look at his feet, not his eyes. That's it. Now step to the left slowly." Sarah's heart pounded as she followed his instructions, acutely aware of how small she was compared to the massive animals surrounding her. But gradually, she began to understand the rhythm of it, the way the cattle moved as a group, the importance of positioning and timing. When the buyer arrived, Jake was waiting by the gate, his good arm resting on the fence rail, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Sarah stood beside him, dust on her clothes and sweat on her forehead, but with a sense of accomplishment that surprised her. The sale went well. Better than well. Actually, the buyer was impressed with the quality of the cattle and offered a price that made Jake's eyes widen, as they shook hands awkwardly, with Jake's left hand. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Emma play with Rex in the yard, Jake turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" "For assuming you couldn't handle ranch work. For thinking you were too delicate to sit soft. You proved me wrong today." Sarah considered this. "I was terrified," she admitted. "When that bull looked at me, I thought I was going to die. But you didn't run. You listened, you learned, you got the job done. That's what matters out here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the pasture. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, defeated, desperate, convinced she was helpless without David. Today, she'd handled half-wild cattle and helped save a crucial business deal. The transformation felt both gradual and sudden, like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse photography. "Jake," she said finally, "about what you said the other week. About staying permanently. About being partners. His body tensed slightly. Yeah, I want to make it official. Not just the staying part, but the partnership part. I want to contribute financially, to have a real stake in the ranch's success. Jake frowned. Sarah, you don't have any money. I have David's life insurance. It's not much, but it's something. And I have ideas for the ranch, ways we could diversify income. That garden produced more vegetables than we can eat. What if we expanded it, started selling at the farmer's market? And Emma mentioned wanting to learn to ride. What if we offered riding lessons to other kids? Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering. You've really thought about this. I've thought about little else. This place, this life, it's not temporary for me anymore. I want to build something here. With you. The last words came out softer than she'd intended, carrying implications that made her heart race. Jake turned to look at her, and she saw her own cautious hope reflected in his eyes. Partners, he said finally, extending his good hand. Sarah took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Partners, she agreed. Neither of them mentioned the way their hands lingered together, or the way the word partners seemed to carry the weight of promises yet to be made. But as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging that went deeper than gratitude or convenience. She was home. September brought the first hint of autumn to the ranch, painting the aspen trees in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah had been living at the Broken Arrow for 2 months now, and the rhythms of ranch life had become as natural to her as breathing. She woke before dawn to help Jake with morning chores, spent her days managing the expanded garden and the bookkeeping, and fell into bed each night, exhausted but satisfied, in a way she hadn't felt since before. David's illness. Emma had blossomed in the mountain air and open spaces. Her cheeks were pink with health, her eyes bright with curiosity about everything from the migration patterns of the geese overhead to the way Jake could predict weather by watching the cattle's behavior. She'd started school in town, riding the bus each morning with the confidence of a child who finally felt secure in her world. But it was the evening routine that Sarah treasured most. After dinner, the three of them would sit on the porch, Jake whittling while Emma played with Rex, and Sarah would find herself stealing glances at the man who had become such an integral part of their lives. Jake's shoulder had healed well, though he was more careful now about trusting green horses. He'd started teaching Sarah to ride, patient with her nervousness, and encouraging when she made progress. These lessons had become a sweet torture for Sarah, with Jake's hands guiding hers on the reins, his voice low and steady, as he explained the subtle communication between horse and rider. "You're thinking too much," he said one afternoon, as Sarah struggled to get her mare, Buttercup, to respond to her commands. "Stop trying to control everything. Trust her, and let her feel what you want." Sarah laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent. "Easy for you to say. You grew up on horseback, and you grew up in the city, but you figured out how to handle cattle. This is just another language to learn." He was right, of course. Sarah had discovered she had a natural affinity for ranch work, an ability to read animal behavior that surprised even Jake. The cattle had accepted her as part of their world, and the horses had begun to respond to her with the same trust they showed Jake. But it was the emotional language she was struggling with, the unspoken communication between herself and Jake, that seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. It came to a head on a Thursday evening when Emma had fallen asleep early, worn out from a school field trip. Sarah was washing dishes while Jake sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the breeding records she'd helped him organize. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. How natural it felt to be here with him. How right it seemed to be planning their future together. "The Henderson mare is due next week," Jake said, looking up from his notes. "First foal, I'll need to keep a close eye on her." "I can help," Sarah said automatically. "Sarah." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to take on everything. I managed this ranch alone for 8 years. I know you did, but you don't have to anymore. I know you did, but you don't have to anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah turned from the sink to find Jake watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Is that what this is about?" he asked quietly. "You feeling like you have to earn your place here?" Sarah's hands stilled on the dish towel. "Maybe. Partly. And what's the other part?" She looked at him rarely, looked at him and felt her heart skip. When had she started loving him? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but the feeling was there, warm and certain in her chest. Was it when he'd listened to Emma's stories with complete attention? When he'd trusted her to help with the cattle sale? When he'd built Emma a tire swing without being asked? "The other part," she said slowly. is that I want to be here. Not because I'm grateful, not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I choose to be. Jake set down his pen and stood, crossing to where she stood by the sink. And me? Where do I fit into that choice? Sarah's breath caught. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could smell the scent of hay and leather that always seemed to cling to him. You fit into it completely, she whispered. For a moment, they stood frozen, the weight of confession hanging between them. Then Jake reached up, his calloused fingers gentle as they touched her cheek. I've been wanting to kiss you for weeks, he said. What's stopping you? The fear that you're not ready, that you're still grieving David, still healing from everything you've lost. Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I'll always love David. He was my first love, Emma's father. But Jake, he's gone, and I'm not. I'm here, with you, and I'm ready to live again. When she opened her eyes, Jake was studying her face, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Are you sure? Instead of answering with words, Sarah rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like a question. Then Jake's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Jake rested his forehead against hers, his hand still framing her face. I love you, he said simply. I know it's complicated. I know there are things we need to figure out, but I love you, Sarah. You and Emma both. Sarah felt tears prick her, eyes not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. I love you too. I was so scared to admit it, even to myself. Why? Because loving you means letting go of the life I had planned. It means trusting in something new, something uncertain. It means believing that I deserve to be happy again. Jake's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. You deserve all the happiness in the world. You and Emma both. That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her lips still tingling from Jake's kiss. Down the hall, she could hear Emma's soft breathing, the sound of a child who felt safe and loved. Outside, the wind whispered through the aspen trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. For the first time in months, Sarah wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to build it, day by day. Alongside the man who had shown her that home wasn't a place you found, it was a choice you made. With the right person, in the right moment, tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities, to grow into the life she was choosing. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be here, to be loved, to be home. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains with white while the aspen leaves still clung to their branches in shades of amber and gold. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake and Emma build a snowman in the yard, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Rex supervised from the porch, his tail wagging approval at their efforts. It had been 3 weeks since the night Jake had kissed her, and the shift in their relationship had been both subtle and profound. They were more openly affectionate, now Jake's hand finding hers across the dinner table, Sarah's fingers brushing his shoulder as she passed behind his chair. But they were also taking things slowly, both of them aware that they were building something that needed to last. Emma had adjusted to the change, with the resilience of childhood. She'd started calling Jake Papa Jake without prompting, and Sarah had watched with amazement as Jake's face lit up the first time he heard it. He'd been teaching Emma to ride, patient with her fears, and encouraging when she made progress. Last week, she'd managed to trot Buttercup around the corral without help, her face glowing with pride. We're going to need more firewood, Jake said, stamping snow off his boots as he came inside. Storm's supposed to hit tonight. I'll help you. Split it, Sarah offered, already reaching for her coat. Sarah, you don't need to. We're partners. Remember? Partners share the work. Jake smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Yes, ma'am, partners. They worked side by side in the woodshed, falling into the rhythm they'd developed. Over the months, Jake would split the logs, Sarah would stack them, and they'd talk about everything from Emma's progress in school to their plans for expanding the garden next spring. It was during these quiet moments that Sarah felt most grateful for the life she'd found here. Jake, she said as they finished stacking the last of the wood, I want to talk to you about something. He leaned against the workbench, giving her his full attention. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about Emma's future, about college, about opportunities. I want to make sure she has choices, that she's not limited by growing up in such a remote area. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. What are you thinking? I want to start a college fund for her, with the money from David's insurance, and maybe some of the profits from the vegetable sales. I know it's not much, but Sarah, Jake's voice, was gentle but firm. Emma's future is important to both of us. We'll figure it out together. I don't want you to feel obligated. This isn't about obligation. It's about love. I love that little girl, like she's my own daughter. Her future matters to me. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She is lucky to have you. We're all lucky to have each other. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Jake sat by the fire, planning their strategy for the storm. The weather reports were predicting significant snow, and ranch life had taught Sarah the importance of being prepared. We'll need to move the cattle to the lower pasture, Jake said, studying the weather map, and check the generator. Power lines go down easy in this kind of weather. I'll make sure we have enough supplies, Sarah said. And I'll prepare some meals we can heat on the wood stove if we lose power. Jake looked at her with admiration. You've learned a lot about ranch life in just a few months. I've had a good teacher. You've been more than a good student. You've been a true partner. The storm hit just after midnight, bringing with it winds that rattled the windows and snow that fell in thick, heavy flakes. Sarah woke to find Jake already up, checking the weather and the animals via radio with his neighboring ranchers. How bad is it? She asked, wrapping her robe around herself. Bad enough. We're going to lose power soon, and the roads are already impassable. Good thing we prepared. They spent the day in cozy isolation, playing board games with Emma, reading by the fire, and sharing stories of their childhoods. Sarah found herself marveling at how natural it felt to be snowbound with Jake and Emma. How the potential stress of the situation had transformed into an opportunity for togetherness. Tell me about your first winter on the ranch, Sarah said, as they sat by the fire that evening. Emma curled up between them with a book. Jake's eyes grew distant. I was 12. My dad had just died, and my mom was struggling to keep things together. We had a storm like this one, and I thought we were going to lose everything. But the neighbors came, helped us through it. That's when I learned that out here, you're only as strong as your community. Sarah reached for his hand. Is that why you opened your door to us that night? Partly, but mostly because I looked at you and Emma and saw myself people who needed help, who needed a place to belong. And now, Jake squeezed her hand. Now, I can't imagine this place without you. The power went out just after Emma fell asleep, but the house stayed warm thanks to the wood stove and the preparations they'd made. Sarah and Jake sat close together on the couch, talking quietly by firelight. I've been thinking, Jake said, his voice thoughtful, about making this official. Sarah's heart skipped. What do you mean? I mean legally. Adoption papers for Emma, if you're willing. Marriage for us, when you're ready. Sarah turned to face him fully, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. You want to adopt Emma? I want to be her father in every way that matters. I want her to have my name, my protection, my love. I want to know that if something happens to me, she'll inherit this ranch, that she'll always have a home here. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. Jake, that's more than I ever dreamed of. And the other part, marriage. Sarah thought of David, of the promises they'd made to each other that death had cut short. Then she thought of Jake, of the life they were building together, of the love that had grown between them, like wildflowers after rain. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. Jake pulled her close, and they held each other by the dying firelight, listening to the storm rage outside their warm sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, digging out from the snow, checking on the animals, restoring normal operations. But tonight, they were simply a family, safe and together, and planning for a future that sparkled with possibility. I love you, Jake murmured against her hair. I love you too, Sarah replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but inside the old ranch house, 3 hearts beat in harmony, sheltered by love and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. Spring arrived with a rush of wildflowers and the sound of snowmelt rushing down from the mountains. Sarah stood in the expanded garden, her hands dirty from planting, and her heart full of contentment. The vegetables from last year's harvest had been such a success at the farmer's market that she'd doubled the size of the plot, and Jake had surprised her by building a proper greenhouse. It's beautiful, Mama, Emma said, running between the rows of newly planted seedlings. At 4 years old, she was becoming Jake's shadow, following him around the ranch with endless questions and boundless enthusiasm. Careful of the tomatoes, sweetheart, Sarah called, then looked up to see Jake approaching with something hidden behind his back. Ladies, he said with mock formality, I have a surprise. Emma bounced on her toes. What is it? What is it? Close your eyes, Jake instructed. And both Sarah and Emma obediently squeezed their eyes shut. Sarah heard rustling. Then Jake's voice, warm with barely contained excitement. Okay, open them. Sarah opened her eyes to find Jake down on one knee, a small velvet box in his hands. Her breath caught in her throat. Sarah Chen, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You knocked on my door during the worst storm of the year, and you brought sunshine into my life. You've made this house a home, this ranch a family enterprise, and my heart whole again. Emma gasped, clapping her hands together. Papa Jake, are you asking Mama to marry you? I am, little one. Sarah, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my best friend for all the days of our lives? Sarah looked at the ring of simple solitaire that caught the morning light, then at Jake's face. Weathered by years of sun and wind, but young with hope, she thought of the journey that had brought her here, from desperate widow to confident rancher, from broken to whole. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Emma cheered, and Rex barked his approval. When he set her down, Sarah cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Jake Sullivan. I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us. And I choose you, he replied, kissing her deeply. Forever and always. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the meadow behind the house, where wildflowers bloomed in wild profusion. It was a small affair, just Emma as flower girl, Jake's elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, as best man, and Sarah's sister, who flew in from California as maid of honor. Pastor Williams from the town church officiated, his weathered hands steady as he spoke about love that weathers storms and partnerships that grow stronger with each passing season. Sarah wore a simple white dress that she'd found in town, her bouquet a collection of wildflowers Emma had picked that morning. Do you, Jacob Sullivan, take Sarah to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jake said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. And do you, Sarah Chen, take Jacob to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Sarah replied, her voice strong and clear. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise. When they broke apart, Emma rushed forward, wrapping her arms around both of them. Now, we're a real family, she announced, causing the small gathering to laugh. We were always a real family, Jake said, lifting Emma into his arms. Now we're just making it official. The reception was held on the porch, with Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pie and a playlist of country music that had the older guests sharing stories of their own courtships. As the sun set behind the mountains, Jake and Sarah shared their first dance as husband and wife, swaying to an old song about love that lasts forever. No regrets? Jake asked, holding her close. None, Sarah replied. This is exactly where I belong. Later, after the guests had gone home and Emma had fallen asleep in her new bedroom, Jake had spent weeks converting the spare room into a princess paradise. Sarah and Jake sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I have something for you, Jake said, reaching into his jacket pocket. A wedding present. He handed her a manila envelope, and Sarah opened it to find legal documents. Adoption papers, with Emma's name soon to be changed to Emma Sullivan. I've already filed them, Jake said. The hearing is next month. If it's what you want. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. It's what I want. It's what Emma wants too. She asked me yesterday if she could call you Daddy instead of Papa Jake. Jake's face lit up. Really? Really? You're going to be her father in every way that matters. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of distant ranches twinkle in the valley below. Sarah thought of the woman she'd been a year ago, broken, desperate, convinced her life was over. Now she was married to a man who loved her completely, mother to a daughter who was thriving, and owner of a ranch that was becoming more successful with each passing season. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For opening your door that night. For giving us a home. For loving us. Jake pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for knocking. For staying. For making me remember what it feels like to have a family. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Emma's voice drifted from her open window. I wish we could stay together forever and ever. Some wishes, Jake said softly, are meant to come true. 2 years after their wedding, Sarah stood in the ranch kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she prepared for the arrival of their first official agritourism guests. The Broken Arrow Ranch experience had been her ideal way to share the beauty of ranch life with city families while creating additional income. Jake had been skeptical at first, but after seeing the success of Sarah's farmers market ventures, he'd agreed to try it. The cabin's ready, Jake announced, coming through the back door with Emma trailing behind him. At 6 years old, Emma was pure ranch girl, confident on horseback, knowledgeable about animal care, and eager to help with every aspect of the operation. And the horses? Sarah asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Buttercup and Daisy are perfect. For beginners, Rex has been practicing his gentle dog behavior all week. Sarah laughed. Rex had appointed himself the ranch's official greeter, and his enthusiasm sometimes overwhelmed visitors. They'd been working on teaching him to sit calmly instead of jumping on everyone who arrived. The first guests were the Morrison family from Denver, two parents and their 10-year-old twins, who had never seen a real farm animal. Sarah watched from the window as Jake introduced them to the horses, his natural teaching ability evident as he showed the children how to approach the animals safely. They look scared, Emma observed, pressing her nose to the glass. They're just learning, Sarah said. Remember how nervous you were around the horses when we first got here? Emma giggled. I was little then. Now I'm big and brave. The week flew by in a blur of riding lessons, garden tours, and evening campfires where Jake entertained the guests with stories of ranch life. Sarah found herself energized by the interaction with new people, by the opportunity to share the knowledge she'd gained over the past few years. This is amazing, Mrs. Morrison said on their last evening, as they sat around the fire pit, watching the stars emerge. The kids haven't stopped talking about everything they've learned. And this food, Sarah, you should write a cookbook. I've been thinking about that, Sarah admitted. Ranch cooking, using what you grow yourself. You should do it, Jake said, his arm around her shoulders. You've got a gift for making everything taste like home. After the guests left, Sarah and Jake evaluated their first foray into agritourism. The feedback had been overwhelmingly positive, and they already had bookings for the rest of the summer. I think we've got something here, Jake said, looking over the guest comments. People are hungry for this kind of experience. Pun intended, Sarah teased. Always. He pulled her close. I'm proud of you. You know, this was your vision. And you made it work. We made it work. I couldn't have done any of this without you. It was true. The ranch had become a true partnership, with each of them contributing their strengths to create something neither could have achieved alone. Sarah's business acumen and people skills complemented Jake's ranching expertise and steady reliability that night. After Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch, reviewing plans for expanding the guest accommodation. They'd been discussing building a second cabin to accommodate larger groups. There's something else I want to talk to you about, Sarah said, setting down her notebook. Jake looked up from the construction plans. What's that? Sarah took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jake's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, joy, concern, and finally, pure happiness. Are you sure? I saw Dr. Martinez yesterday. 8 weeks along. Jake set down his papers and pulled her into his arms. How do you feel about it? Terrified and thrilled in equal measure, Sarah admitted. I'm not young anymore, Jake. I'll be 35 when the baby's born. You're strong and healthy, and you're not doing this alone. I know, but there's Emma to think about, and the ranch, and the business, Sarah. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. We'll figure it out. We always do. That weekend, they told Emma the news. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. A baby. Can I help take care of it? Can I teach it to ride horses? Will it be a brother or a sister? We don't know yet, Sarah said, laughing at Emma's rapid-fire questions. But yes, you can help. You're going to be a wonderful big sister. Emma threw her arms around both of them. This is the best news ever. As spring turned to summer, Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The morning sickness was manageable, and she found herself energized by the changes happening in her body. Jake was attentive without being hovering, helping with the heavier ranch work, while still encouraging her independence. The agritourism business continued to grow, with families booking return visits and recommending the ranch to friends. Sarah hired Mrs. Henderson's daughter to help with the cooking and cleaning, creating employment in the small community while managing her own workload. I can't believe how much has changed, Sarah said one evening as they watched Emma practice her riding in the corral. 2 years ago, I was convinced my life was over. Now I'm married to you, expecting our child, running a successful business. Life has a way of surprising us. Jake agreed. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Sarah placed her hand on her growing belly, feeling the flutter of movement that had started a few weeks ago. I used to think I had to choose between honoring David's memory and building a new life. Now, I realize I can do both. He'd be proud of you, Jake said. Of the woman you've become, the mother you are to Emma, the life you've built. And he'd approve of you, Sarah replied. He always said he wanted Emma to have a father who would love her unconditionally. That night, as Sarah lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. The baby kicked gently, as if responding to her contentment. Soon there would be 4 of them: Jake, Emma, herself, and the new little one. The family that had started with a desperate knock on a door during a storm had grown into something beautiful and strong. Outside, the wind whispered through the aspen trees, and in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. Sarah smiled, closed her eyes, and let herself drift off to sleep, surrounded by love and the promise of tomorrow. The call came at 3 a.m, shrill and insistent in the darkness. Sarah woke with a start, her hand automatically going to her rounded belly now, 7 months along as Jake reached for the phone. "Sullivan," he answered, his voice immediately alert despite the hour. Sarah watched his face change as he listened, saw the way his shoulders tensed. "How bad?" he asked. "Okay, yeah, I'll be right there." "What is it?" Sarah asked as he hung up. "Fire at the Morrison place. Started in their barn, spreading fast. They're calling for all available help." Sarah was already throwing back the covers. "I'll come with you, Sarah." "No. You're pregnant, and fire is dangerous." "I'm not going to fight the fire, but I can help with the animals, coordinate supplies, do whatever needs doing." She was already pulling on her clothes. "The Morrisons have been good neighbors to us. We help each other here." Jake studied her face, then nodded. "Okay, but you stay well back from the flames. Promise me." "I promise." They woke Emma and dropped her at Mrs. Henderson's house, then drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the orange glow on the horizon. The Morrison Ranch was in chaos when they arrived, fire trucks from 3 counties working to contain the blaze, neighbors helping to move livestock to safety, and Jim Morrison standing in his yard, watching his life's work go up in flames. "Jake, thank God," Jim said, gripping Jake's hand. The fire jumped from the barn to the hay storage. "We've lost most of the winter feed. What can we do?" Jake asked. "Help me get the cattle moved to the far pasture. The wind's shifting, and I don't want them trapped." Sarah spent the next hours helping coordinate the civilian response, organizing food for the firefighters, helping to move furniture and equipment out of threatened buildings, and keeping track of the rescued animals. Her back ached from the unaccustomed activity, but she pushed through, knowing that crises like this were when communities either came together or fell apart. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the damage was extensive. The Morrisons had lost their barn, their hay storage, and most of their winter feed. Without it, they'd have to sell their cattle and probably the ranch itself. "I don't know what we're going to do," Jim's wife Mary said, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. 40 years we've been building this place." Sarah looked around at the gathered neighbors' ranchers who were facing their own challenges, their own tight budgets. But she also saw the determination in their faces, the way they'd come together in crisis. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. That's what neighbors do. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Sarah organized a community response, coordinating donated labor and materials. Jake spent his days helping to rebuild the Morrison barn, working alongside a dozen other ranchers who'd put aside their own work to help. "You should be resting," Jake told Sarah one evening as she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and donation lists. "I'm fine," she said, though her back was killing her and her feet were swollen. "Mrs. Patterson is donating 50 bales of hay, and the hardware store is giving us the lumber at cost." "Sarah," Jake's voice was gentle but concerned, "you're 7 months pregnant. You've been working 16-hour days for 2 weeks. You need to slow down." "I can't slow down. The Morrisons need you healthy." "We all do." Jake pulled up a chair beside her. "I'm worried about you. About the baby." Sarah looked at her husband, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I'm okay, Jake." "Really? Are you? When was the last time you slept through the night? When was the last time you didn't have a headache?" Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Jake was right. She'd been pushing herself too hard, driven by the need to help their neighbors and prove her worth to the community. But at what cost? "I'll slow down," she promised. After the barn raising this weekend, the barn raising was a community event that brought people from 3 counties. Sarah watched from a lawn chair. Jake's compromise between letting her participate and keeping her safe as the new structure took shape. Emma ran between the workers, carrying water and small tools, her face bright with excitement. "He did this," Jake said, sitting beside her during a break. "You organized all of this." "We all did it," Sarah corrected. "I just made some phone calls." "You did more than that. You reminded this community what it means to take care of each other." By evening, the barn was complete. The Morrisons stood in their yard, surrounded by neighbors, watching the sun set behind their new barn. Mary Morrison hugged Sarah tightly. "I don't know how to thank you," she said through tears. "You don't need to thank me," Sarah replied. "You would have done the same for us." That night, Sarah went into labor. It started as a backache that she attributed to the long day. But as the contractions grew stronger and more regular, she realized what was happening. Jake timed the contractions while Mrs. Henderson stayed with Emma, both of them trying to remain calm. "It's too early," Sarah said, gripping Jake's hand as another contraction hit. "It's going to be okay," Jake said, though she could hear the fear in his voice. "Dr. Martinez is meeting us at the hospital." The drive to the hospital was the longest of Sarah's life. Jake drove carefully, but quickly, one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers. "Talk to me," he said. "Stay focused." "On my voice I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "What if something's wrong? What if the baby's going to be fine? You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine." At the hospital, Dr. Martinez confirmed what Sarah already knew: she was in active labor, 7 weeks early. The next hours were a blur of medical activity, monitors beeping, and Jake's steady presence beside her. "The baby's in distress," Dr. Martinez said finally. "We need to do a C-section." Sarah looked at Jake, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. "Will the baby be okay?" "Babies born at this stage usually do well," Dr. Martinez said gently, "but we need to act quickly." As they wheeled her toward the operating room, Sarah grabbed Jake's hand. "I love you," she said. "No matter what happens, I love you." "I love you too," he replied, his voice breaking. "Both of you." The surgery seemed to take forever and no time at all. Sarah was aware of pressure, of voices, of Jake's hand in hers. Then suddenly, there was a sound that made her heart soar: a baby's cry, thin but strong. "It's a boy," Dr. Martinez announced. Small but breathing on his own. Sarah caught a glimpse of their son as the nurses worked on him, tiny but perfect, with Jake's strong jaw and a head full of dark hair. Then he was whisked away to the NICU, and Sarah was left with the overwhelming need to hold him. "He's beautiful," Jake said, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect." "Can I see him?" Sarah asked. "Soon," Dr. Martinez promised. "Let's get you settled first." The next hours were a haze of recovery and worry. Jake shuttled between Sarah's room and the NICU, bringing reports of their son's progress. Emma arrived with Mrs. Henderson, her eyes wide with excitement and concern. "Is the baby okay?" she asked, climbing carefully onto Sarah's bed. "He's little, but he's strong," Sarah said, stroking Emma's hair. "Just like his big sister." "What's his name?" Sarah looked at Jake, and they shared a moment of understanding. "David," she said. "David Sullivan." Emma smiled. "That's a good name. Can I hold him?" "Soon," Sarah promised. "When he's a little bigger." That evening, Sarah was finally well enough to be wheeled to the NICU. David was in an incubator, tiny but alert, his dark eyes seeming to focus on her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered, placing her hand on the incubator. "I'm your mama." Jake stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be okay," he said, and for the first time since the labor started, Sarah believed him. "Yes," she said, watching their son grip Jake's finger through the incubator's porthole. "He's going to be just fine." David came home 3 weeks later, healthy and strong, despite his early arrival. Sarah sat in the rocking chair Jake had made for her, nursing their son while Emma read him a story about a brave little rabbit. "He likes stories," Emma announced. "Just like me." "Just like you," Sarah agreed, marveling at the perfection of this moment: her daughter, her son, her husband, their home. The family that had started with a desperate knock on a door had grown into something beautiful and complete. Outside, the Autumn wind rustled through the aspen trees, and in the distance, the cattle lowed contentedly in the pasture. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself sink into the peace of it all, grateful beyond words for the life they'd built together. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the porch of the Broken Arrow Ranch, watching the organized chaos of the annual Community Harvest Festival. What had started as a small gathering to celebrate the success of their agritourism business had evolved into a beloved local tradition, drawing families from across the county. Emma, now 11 and every inch the confident ranch girl, was leading a group of younger children on a nature walk, her voice carrying across the meadow as she explained the different wildflowers and their uses. David, at 5, was helping Jake demonstrate roping techniques to fascinated city kids, his small hands surprisingly skilled with the lasso. "Hard to believe it's been 6 years since that first night," said Mary Morrison, appearing at Sarah's side with 2 cups of cider. The Morrison Ranch had not only survived the fire but had thrived, becoming a model for community-supported agriculture. 6 years, Sarah repeated, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime." "You've built something special here," Mary continued. "Not just the ranch, but the whole community. People feel connected. Again, like they're part of something bigger." Sarah watched Jake swing David up onto his shoulders, both of them laughing as they walked toward the barn where the evening dance would be held. The sight filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cider. "We all built it," she said. "That's what makes it work." The festival continued until well after dark, with live music, dancing, and storytelling around the fire pit. Sarah found herself thinking of that first storm. The desperate woman who had knocked on Jake's door with nothing but a broken truck and a frightened child. That woman could never have imagined this: the successful ranch, the thriving business, the extended family of friends and neighbors who had become central to their lives. "Mama, look," David called from across the yard, where he was showing off his latest accomplishment, mounting his pony without help. At 5, he was already showing the same natural affinity for ranch life that Emma had developed. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah called back, her heart swelling with pride as the evening wound down and the last guests departed. The Sullivan family found themselves alone on the porch, the 3 children tired but happy, Jake's arm round Sarah's shoulders. "Good day," Jake said simply. "The best," Sarah agreed. Emma yawned, leaning against Sarah's other side. "I like it when all our friends come to visit." "Me too," David added, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. "Time for bed, little ones," Sarah said, but neither child moved. They were content to stay in this moment, surrounded by family and the comfortable sounds of the ranch at night. "Tell us the story," Emma said suddenly. "About the storm." Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. Over the years, the story of their meeting had become family legend, told and retold, with embellishments and variations. "You know that story," Jake said gently. "But I want to hear it again," David said. "The part about how Mama knocked on our door," Sarah smiled. "It was the worst storm I'd ever seen," she began, falling into the familiar rhythm of the tale. "Thunder and lightning, rain so heavy I could barely see the road. The truck was making terrible noises, and I thought we might not make it. But you saw the light," Emma prompted. "We saw the light in the window," Sarah continued, "like a beacon calling us home. And Papa Jake opened the door," David added. "And Papa Jake opened the door," Sarah confirmed. "He didn't know us, didn't know if we were dangerous or just desperate, but he opened the door anyway. Because that's what good people do," Emma said solemnly. "Because that's what good people do," Sarah agreed. Jake cleared his throat. "There's something I never told you about that night," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What, I'd been having a rough time. The ranch was struggling. I was lonely. And I'd been thinking about giving up, selling the place, moving to town, finding some other way to make a living." "You never said I was ashamed," Jake admitted. "This land has been in my family for generations. The idea of being the one to lose it, .. He shook his head. "That storm hit, and I was sitting in this very spot, trying to figure out how to tell my grandfather's ghost that I'd failed." Sarah's heart ached for the man he'd been that night: proud, stubborn, struggling alone with burdens too heavy for one person to carry. "Then you knocked on my door," Jake continued. "You and Emma, soaked to the skin, with nothing but hope and desperation. And I looked at you and thought, here's someone who needs help more than I need to feel sorry for myself. And helping us helped you," Sarah said softly. "More than you know. Having you here, having a family to provide for, having a reason to fight for this place, it changed everything." You saved me just as much as I saved you. David had fallen asleep against Sarah's shoulder, his breathing deep and even. Emma was fighting to stay awake, determined not to miss a moment of the story. What happened next? She asked drowsily. What happened next, Sarah said, was that we realized we were home. All of us. Right here. Right where we were meant to be. And we lived happily ever after, Emma mumbled. We're still living it, Jake said, his voice warm with contentment. Every day. Later, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. The ranch was quiet except for the gentle sounds of animals settling for the night and the distant call of an owl. Any regrets? Jake asked, echoing the question from their wedding night. Sarah considered the question seriously. The years hadn't been without challenges. David's early arrival, a difficult drought the year before, the constant juggling of family and business responsibilities. But through it all, they'd faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each test. None, she said finally. This life, this family, this place, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Even with all the mud and early mornings and stubborn cattle. Sarah laughed. Especially with the mud and early mornings and stubborn cattle. This is real life. Jake, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Sarah made a wish not for anything new, but for the continuation of what they had, for health and happiness, for their children to grow up strong and confident, for the ranch to continue thriving, for their love to deepen with each passing year. What did you wish for? Jake asked, having seen her close her eyes. I wished for tomorrow, Sarah said, and the day after that, and all the days after that. I wished for time, as much time as we can get, right here, together. Jake squeezed her hand. That's a good wish. The best wish, Sarah agreed. In the distance. Thunder rumbled, not the angry thunder of destruction, but the gentle promise of rain for the crops and grass. Sarah smiled, remembering another storm, another night, another life entirely. That storm had torn her world apart, but it had also brought her here, to this moment, to this man, to this home. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For opening your door. For saying yes when I asked to stay. For making me understand that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the worst things. Jake lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you for knocking, for staying, for making me remember what home feels like. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and the ranch settled into peaceful sleep. Inside the house, Emma and David dreamed of horses and adventures, safe in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. And on the porch, Sarah and Jake held each other close, grateful for the storm that had brought them together, and for all the calm, beautiful days that had followed. The young widow who had knocked on his door in desperation was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for love. And the lonely rancher who had opened that door had found not just a family, but a partnership that made everything possible. They were home. They had always been home. They would always be home. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they would wake together and face another day of the beautiful, ordinary miracle of their shared life. There would be chores to do, and meals to cook, and children to raise, and dreams to chase. There would be storms to weather, and challenges to overcome, and joys to celebrate. But there would be love. Always, always love. And that was more than enough. That was everything.